Okay, ninth and 10th grade. We're going to finish this up this week. We are going to be doing nursery rhymes. This is our continuation of that. These are silly mini poems. Now, I told you last time to do the little quiz that was in your book. That's not for a grade. It's just a party game, guys. So you don't have to send me the answers or anything. Nothing like that. I just asked you to see how many you knew. And then I did get a really interesting comment by one of our students. He said, my parents are Mexican. I'm pretty sure they never read any of these to me before. And that's a really good point because a lot of these nursery rhymes, in fact, all of them, are very Anglo-Saxon in nature, meaning they're from England. And then, of course, those have traveled throughout the world in other places where people are English speakers because these are primarily English poems. So Canada, the United States, and throughout Europe, places where English is the primary language. Australia, for instance. So I told you guys I would give you the answers to this, but the answers are already in your book. I took each one of the quiz questions, and those are the different nursery rhymes we're going to be studying. So the first one, what did Peter Piper pick? If you look at your very first poem or nursery rhyme in here, it's Peter Piper. Okay, so what did he pick? He picked a peck of pickled peppers. This is a tongue twister. There's really no real, there's no big background to it. Okay, it's just a tongue twister. It's just supposed to be funny. Okay, and then I told you for homework, read the poem 3 times fast to a friend. Have them sign their name. And you can use your parents as friends. It's fine with me. Okay. Dog paw would even work if you really want to do that. Tell it to your dog and they can roll their eyes at you. But we can do this. Peter Piper, come on. Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. A peck of pickled peppers Peter Piper picked. If Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers, where's the peck of pickled peppers Peter Piper picked? Huh? Where is it? You do it and find out. Okay. Rub-a-dub-dub. Okay, I'll be real honest with you. This is just one of the really silly, weird poems, and people to this day don't know exactly what it's about. They have guesses. The idea that floats around the most often is that a butcher, a baker, and a candlestick maker were all people who made a lot of money, but they were considered the lowest class of society. They weren't landowners, and they probably had some pretty unsavory habits when it came to how they spent their money, like on girls, for instance. So sometimes that comes about in that they weren't really respected. I don't know how much of that is true, but that's like what kind of floats around out there. So the first one, I've never heard that version until I wrote it down from this book because I got all of these from an English site because that's where they originated from. And so the first one, I guess, is more original, but the second one is the one everybody really knows. So let's start with the first one. It's rub-a-dub-dub, 3 men in a tub. And who do you think they were? The butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker. They all sailed out to sea. 'Twas enough to make a man stare. That's a terrible rhyme. No, I'm kidding. But the idea is there that there's something a little odd. Okay. But the one I grew up with, and we said it over and over again without thinking anything of it, it was just kind of a weird poem, is rub-a-dub-dub, 3 men in a tub. And who do you think they be? The butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker. All put out to sea. Okay. Our next one is Georgie Porgy, which my dad used to quote all the time because it was funny. He thought it was hilarious. I think he just liked the idea of somebody kissing the girls. Okay, that was his modus operandi. But there is an actual historical background to Georgie Porgy, and it's also the third answer for your quiz. Okay, so let's look at Georgie Porgy. Georgie Porgy, puddin' and pie, kissed the girls and made them cry. When the boys came out to play, Georgie Porgy ran away. Okay, there is actual, weirdly enough, historical evidence. There was a Georgie Porgy. His name was George Villiers. He was the first Duke of Buckingham, which is located near London. So the origins of the lyrics to Georgie Porgy are English and refer to the courtier, George Villiers, first Duke of Buckingham. King James I named him Steenie, a reference to Saint Stephen, who in the Bible describes as having the face of an angel. Villiers' good looks also appealed to the ladies, hello, and his highly suspect morals were much in question. He kind of dated around. He had an affair with a married lady, the Queen of France. Villiers' most notorious affair was with his liaison of Anne of Austria, who was the Queen of France and married to the French King Louis XIII, badly injured both of their reputations. This, however, was overlooked due to his great friendship with the English King James I. He was disliked by both courtiers and commoners, not the least for helping to arrange the marriage of King James's son to the French Catholic princess Henrietta Maria. And King James's son later became King Charles I. And we named Maryland after Henrietta Maria. So we do have a connection there in the United States. George Villiers, Georgie Porgy, exercised great influence over the king, who allowed him many liberties. That means let him get away with a lot of stuff. Let's see, where are we? Villiers' private liaisons, affairs, and political scheming were questioned, and Parliament, who finally lost patience and stopped the king intervening on behalf of Georgie Porgy. The romantic elements of George Villiers and Anne of Austria are featured in the novel The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas. So if you've never read Alexandre Dumas, feel free. You can also watch several movies that were made on the subject. Okay, Three Blind Mice. Always fun. Also has historical context, which is kind of fun to look at. So it says, 3 blind mice, see how they run. They all ran after the farmer's wife, who cut off their tails with a carving knife. Did you ever see such a thing in your life? 3 blind mice. Now, it's often sung as a round. The first group of people will sing 3 blind mice, see how they run, and then the next group of people will start to sing that while the first group keep singing they all ran after the farmer's wife. And so from this you get a round, people singing all of the same words but at different times. And eventually you sing it as long as you can until somebody finally messes up and people start laughing, because after a while it gets kind of silly. There is an origin to this tale, though. Just a quick note, because I said I got this from an English website. When it comes to English grammar, the double quotations go inside of single quotations. It's the opposite in the United States. In the United States, we use double quotations for things like when we say the tale of 3 blind mice, tale of 3 blind mice. In England, it would be tale. They do it the exact opposite way. And also, the period goes on the outside of the quotation mark in England. It's a little weird when you're reading English printed books. My eye always gets stuck on those periods outside of quotation marks. For some reason, I can't just ignore them. I hate that. Okay, so I don't hate the fact that they do that. I just hate the fact that I can't skip over it. So let's talk about this origin tale. The origin of the words "to 3 blind mice rhyme" are based on English history. The farmer's wife refers to the daughter of King Henry VIII, Queen Mary I. That is a picture of Queen Mary I. Mary was a staunch Catholic, and her violent persecution of Protestants led to the nickname Bloody Mary, even though her dad killed way more people than she did. And her sister, Elizabeth, killed way more people than she did, probably 3 times as many. Her dad, probably 10 times as many. Mary was, the reference to farmer's wife in the 3 blind mice refers to the massive estates which she and her husband, King Philip of Spain, possessed. The 3 blind mice were 3 noblemen who adhered to the Protestant faith, who were convicted of plotting against the queen. She did not have them dismembered and blinded as inferred in the 3 blind mice, but she did have them burnt at the stake. Another nursery rhyme which features Bloody Mary can be found in Mary, Mary, Quite Contrary, a nursery rhyme. But of course, when we talk about today, how do we use the 3 blind mice today? Shrek, there it is. Shrek is using universal sources. The whole movie Shrek is using universal sources and pop culture as well. And they're kind of sneering at Disney all through the whole thing. So Shrek is great for universal sources. Okay, Monday's Child. I didn't hear about this until I was a teenager, and I was watching one of those movie of the weeks when my mom, and I remember, this is how much I remember why you need universal sources, honestly. I remember sitting and watching this movie of the week with her, and it was about a boy who needed a heart transplant, and the mom was really pushing and fighting for her son to get a heart transplant because it was at the time when heart transplants were brand new. They just started using them. And she wanted her son to have a few more years of life. And that was really all you were guaranteed, was like 2 to 5 years. That was it on a heart transplant. And then people died because They didn't have the medication yet to regulate the new transplantation. They were just learning how to do this kind of transplant. And so I remember in the movie, she hands him a card that calls him, I think it was called Friday's Child is the name of the movie, I think. And he took the card and he kind of laughed. He says, "But Mom, I was born on a Wednesday." And she said, "But I never thought of you as a Wednesday's child." Okay? Because a Wednesday's child was considered full of woe. And so she got him the card that specifically didn't have the Wednesday child name on it. But I do remember sitting there and watching this exchange between a mother and a son and thinking to myself, I should know what's going on here, but I was totally lost. I had no idea what they were referring to. I didn't have the knowledge of the universal source in my brain, so I had no way to access it and figure out what they were talking about. I remember turning to my mom and asking her, what does that mean? What's a Wednesday's child versus a Friday's child? And my mom just looked at me. She said, I don't know. She didn't have that universal source either. So it wasn't until I was an adult and I ran across this and I went, oh, now I get it. And that's the whole purpose of universal sources. So we start getting that extra stuff. So let's talk about Monday's child. This is the poem. Monday's child is fair of face, means pretty. Tuesday's child is full of grace. The beautiful gracefulness of the way you walk, the way you act. Wednesday's child is full of woe. That's sadness. Thursday's child has far to go. You may have a long journey ahead of you if you're a Thursday's child. Maybe you have a lot that you're going to accomplish with your life too. Friday's child is loving and giving. Everybody loves that kind of child. Saturday's child works hard for its living. There's nothing wrong with working hard, but if you're working on a Saturday, you're working extra hard. But the child that is born on Sabbath day is bonny and blithe and good and gay. So the child that's born on the day that everybody has off, Sabbath day, and because it's supposed to be God's day, that day that you worship, is extra beautiful, extra blithe, meaning very happy, but just kind of like lighthearted, good, virtuous, and gay, meaning happy. Okay, actually having a sense of humor. So in this traditional poem, the words and lyrics to Monday's child poem are used to associate children with patterns and different names to the days of the week. It's just to teach days of the week. Monday's child is a very popular poem, but the actual words of Monday's child are not well known. We have all learned the days of the week as Monday's child intended, but we cannot seem to remember the qualities of being born on individual days. I have no idea what day I was born on. Sunday was traditionally referred to as the Sabbath day, so there's no specific reference to a Sunday's child. It doesn't say Sunday's child, it says Sabbath child. Okay, Sing a Song of Sixpence. This is one I grew up in, and I remember this one quite well, even though I lived in an area that didn't have blackbirds. We just didn't have them, but we just assumed that if you're singing a song of sixpence, didn't have sixpence either. But I know now, sixpence is a coin. And blackbirds are obviously birds that are black. I figured that one out on my own. But they're actually a smaller bird. They're not a crow or a raven. They're probably about this long. But they can be really destructive to crops. And so a lot of times they'll be either poisoned or shot out of the sky. As a result, there's been too much hunting of blackbirds, and they're just starting to come back. In San Jacinto, they thought with all the farming and everything that went out there and these very destructive birds, they really thought that there were no more blackbirds in San Jacinto, that the red-spotted or red-winged blackbird was extinct, but it came back. And it took a good rain. That was the real reason they left. It wasn't because they were being overhunted or poisoned or anything like that. It was just that the conditions of drought were so extensive that they didn't feel that they could live in the area. So once it rained, and it rained really good, then the blackbirds came back, and they're all over San Jacinto now. So let's sing a song of sixpence, shall we? Sing a song of sixpence, a pocket full of rye, 24 blackbirds baked in a pie. When the pie was open, the birds began to sing. Was that not a dainty dish to set before the king? The king was in his counting house, counting out his money. The queen was in the parlor, eating bread and honey. The maid was in the garden, hanging out the clothes, when along came the blackbird and pecked off her nose. because you have to do that at the end. Okay. So the words to this children's action nursery rhyme, which is often referred to as blackbirds baked in a pie, probably because the image of blackbirds baked in a pie would create in a child's mind. The rye, a pocketful of rye, was purchased to feed birds. Blackbirds and other songbirds were actually eaten as a delicacy. It wasn't unusual in England to eat blackbirds. However, a court jester may have suggested the court cook bake a pie pastry crust and place this over some live blackbirds to surprise and amuse the king. So it would have been like a prank, a joke. When the king goes in to cut the pie open, all of a sudden these live birds come flying out. It would have freaked everybody out, and the jester would have laughed. The jester was the only person in the court that was actually allowed to laugh at the king. And he was there specifically to keep the king humble, and he was the only one allowed to criticize the king. But it was assumed that whatever the jester said wasn't really serious. But the king was supposed to kind of take it seriously. There was some truth in that humor. Okay, it would not be unreasonable for the blackbirds to look for revenge. Hence, when down came a blackbird and pecked off her nose. It's interesting to note that the references to the counting house, because the king's in his counting house, and the queen is eating honey. So that was probably the common man's perception of what a king and a queen spent their time doing. What are they doing? No, they're just in the counting house, counting money, eating honey. And the nursery rhyme, Sing a Song of Sixpence, or Blackbirds Baked in a Pie, always ends with the tweaking of the child's nose. And always has been, always will be, I have anything to do with it. Now later on, when we talked about not really getting the universal source for the movie, but I did have the universal source when I was reading this book. Yes, I did. Because in this one, there's a whole chapter about blackbirds. Little Town on the Prairie by Laura Ingalls Wilder. The family has been working like dogs to raise money to send Mary to college. Mary has been blinded since she was, probably 13 years old. And she's learned how to do a few things on her own, but she needs to go to a school where they actually teach her how to function as well as she possibly can in the real world. And so the family has been working like crazy to try and get enough money for her to go to college. And so Pa planted oats and corn, thinking that those would be cash crops. They could sell those cash crops and then send Mary off to college. The oats ended up getting eaten by the blackbirds. So the oats were no good. So Pa's like, well, on the upside, we got really clean straw. Yay, for the animals to eat. And then the blackbirds went after the corn crop. And that made everybody really, really concerned, really nervous. And so the girls would go out and they'd try to wave their bonnets and try to keep the blackbirds off the corn, and that didn't work. And then Pa went out with his gun and shot at the blackbirds. And every shot would bring down a cloud of blackbirds. And then more would come. And when he killed all the original blackbirds, more would come. And more would come. And they had all different kinds of blackbirds coming and eating this corn, which was the only corn planted for miles around. So it got to the point where Pa runs out of bullets and cartridges, has to go to town to get some more stuff. And Ma and the girls decide they're going to have to the corn crop is wasted. They can't use it anymore. So they're going to go and get whatever corn they can, even if it's a little green, and they're going to cut it off the cobs and dry it out and use that for cornbread later. They're going to grind that up. And Ma also gets this idea of their meat. Let's eat the blackbirds. And the first time they eat them, Pa actually brings them into the house and says, well, they're really fat. They're fat like butter, he says. And so Laura, plucks them and guts them, and then they fry them. And she says they fry in their own fat because they were so fatty. And they said it was really good meat. So Ma decides that she's going to do something really special for dinner after they've created, cut the corn off and are drying it. She says, comb your hair and sit up to the table, Charles, Ma said. This is after Charles comes back from buying cartridges at the store. She opened the oven door and took out the tin milk pan. Think roasting pans, really big, big, big pan. It was full of something covered thickly over with delicately browned biscuit crust. She set it before Pa, and he looked at it amazed. Chicken pie. Sing a song of sixpence, said Ma. Now, immediately, my brain went, psh, okay, I know what's in the pie, because I got that universal source thing going on. Laura went on from there. She was also triggered by this universal source, and so did Carrie and Mary and even Grace. That's the littlest baby, so she's even learning her nursery rhymes now. A pocket full of rye, 24 blackbirds baked in a pie. When the pie was open, the birds began to sing. Was that not a dainty dish to set before the king? Well, I'll be switched, said Pa. He cut into the pie's crust with a big spoon and turned over a big chunk of it onto the plate. The underside was steamed and fluffy. Over it he poured spoonfuls of thin brown gravy, and beside it he laid half a blackbird, browned and so tender the meat was slipping from the bones. He handed that first plate across the table to Ma. The scent of that open pie was making all their mouths water so they had to swallow again and again while they waited for their portions, and under the table the kitty curved against their legs, her hungry purring running into anxious meows. This pan held 12 birds, said Ma. Just 2 apiece, like she's apologizing for only making 12 birds. It is a big family, though. But you think about 12 birds all in this big pie, not 24 birds, so half of what was in the poem. This pan held 12 birds, said Ma, just 2 apiece, but one is all Grace can possibly eat, so that leaves 3 for you, Charles. It takes you to think up a chicken pie a year before there's chickens to make it with, Pa said. He ate a mouthful and said, this beats chicken pie all hollow. This is one of the things I actually appreciate about these books is the way Pa compliments Ma and the way Ma compliments Pa for the work that they do. They respect each other's work, and I like that. They all agreed that blackbird pie was even better than chicken pie. There were besides new potatoes and peas and sliced cucumbers and young boiled carrots that Ma had thinned from the rows and creamy cottage cheese, and the day was not even Sunday. As long as the blackbirds lasted and the garden was green, they could eat like this every day. Laura thought, Ma is right. There is always something to be thankful for. Still, her heart was heavy. The oats and the corn crop were gone. She did not know how Mary would go to college now. The beautiful new dress, the 2 other new dresses, and the pretty underwear must be laid away until next year. It was a cruel disappointment to Mary. Pa ate the last spoonful of pink sugary cream from a saucer of tomatoes and drank his tea. Dinner was over. He got up and took his hat from his nail, and he said to Ma, tomorrow's Saturday. If you'll plan to go into town with me, we can pick out Mary's trunk. Mary gasped and Laura cried out, is Mary going to college? Pa was astonished. He asked, what's the matter with you, Laura? How can she? Laura asked him. There isn't any corn or any oats. I didn't realize you're old enough to be worrying, said Pa. I'm going to sell the heifer calf. Mary cried out, oh no, not the heifer. In another year, the heifer would be a cow. Then they would have 2 cows. Then they would have milk and butter all the year round. Now, if Pa sold the heifer, they would have to wait 2 more years for the little calf to grow up. Okay, so Ma and Pa made a plan. It didn't work out because of the blackbirds. And so they turned around, started eating the blackbirds, and made a new plan. So really interesting application of this universal source to a real life problem. Okay, Little Miss Muffet. Now this one was, the origin was given for a lot of years about, this is what this is really about. And then later on somebody said, I think we need to debunk that. So we're going to talk about the original and then the debunking. So this is Little Miss Muffet. Little Miss Muffet sat on a tuffet. That's a 3-legged stool. It's often pictured with like a frill or a padding on it. Eating of curds and whey. Think cottage cheese. There came a spider and sat down beside her and frightened Miss Muffet away. She's scared of spiders. She's running. So this is the story that was often given. Little Miss Muffet was a small girl. His name was Patience Muffet. Her stepfather, Dr. Muffet, was a famous entomologist who wrote the first scientific catalog of British insects. While eating her breakfast of curds and whey, Little Miss Muffet was frightened by one of his spiders and ran away. This particular nursery rhyme of Little Miss Muffet repeatedly dates back to the late 16th century as indicated by the birthday of Dr. Muffet. But they say it's an unlikely story of Patience Muffet, so maybe it didn't really happen. We'll see. It's up to you. You decide. Okay, Little Jack Horner. This is when I kind of grew up and, tried to get explanations for him. My mom's just like, just take it literally. Stick your thumb in a pie and pull out a plum. Pfft, that's it. Okay. Turns out there's a whole historical reference to it. It says, Little Jack Horner was, the background first. Little Jack Horner was reputed to have been steward to Richard Whiting, who was the Bishop of Glastonbury. Glastonbury was a very large piece of land. It was a very large estate, and it was owned by the priests of the Catholic Church. It had a huge church on Glastonbury. In fact, it became really famous in the King Arthur tales. So the steward had an important role and was responsible for managing the household, collecting taxes, and keeping accounts. So the steward was Jack Horner. Okay. Glastonbury was the largest and wealthiest abbey in England, and this Benedictine monastery owned extensive lands and manors in the county of Somerset. Now, because they owned the property, they could then rent out sections of the property to other people and collect rents on those. Okay. So between 1536 and 1540, after breaking away from the Catholic Church, King Henry VIII and his chief minister, Thomas Cromwell, set about the systematic dissolution of all the monasteries in England. Now that they had left the Catholic Church, the idea of the monasteries being around was silly. The way King Henry looked at it is, if we get rid of the monasteries, then I get all that property. Thank you very much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. That goes straight back to the crown. The reason really for closing the monasteries was to loot them, to take all the gold and silver, and to seize the monastic lands. By 1539, Glastonbury was the only religious house left in Somerset, and it was only a matter of time before Glastonbury Abbey was also seized. So it is rumored that the bishop tried to bribe the king. He figured, if I give the king something, maybe the king will leave me alone. He sent a steward, Jack Horner, with a gift of 12 title deeds. So he had 12 different pieces of property that he owned under the auspices of the Glastonbury. Okay, that's what I'm trying to say. The deeds were said to have been secreted in a pie. In other words, they took these title deeds and they baked them in a pie to get them from point A to point B without getting robbed. Okay. Valuables were often hidden in this bizarre fashion. Jack Horner realized that the bribe would do no good. He's like, why would the king fall for the bribe when he could just take everything? And was said to have stolen the deeds to the manor of the Mells, this being the real plum of the 12 manors. There were 12 manors that were owned by the Bishop of Glastonbury. He stole one of the title deeds for that and kept it for himself. The remaining 11 manors were given to the crown, but to no avail. In other words, the king's going to take everything over anyway. The old bishop was convicted of treason for remaining loyal to Rome instead of to Henry VIII. The jury included his treacherous steward, Horner. So the guy who stole that deed was actually on the jury for the bishop. Ooh. He found Bishop Whiting guilty and sent the old man to a terrible death of being hung. And then when they were hung, they were cut down before they died and then drawn and quartered. Drawn and quartered is being put between 4 horses and all your bones being slowly pulled out of joint. They did that with horses, and then they also later used a machine to do that. The abbey was destroyed. Following the destruction of the abbey, the steward, Horner, moved into the manor of Mells. Whether Horner actually stole the deeds to the manor or was rewarded with them for helping convict the Bishop of Glastonbury is not known, but the manor of Mells became the property of the Horner family, who lived there until the 20th century, so really recent. The first publication date for the lyrics to Little Jack Horner rhyme is 1725. Okay, now let's look at the rhyme. Little Jack Horner sat in a corner eating his Christmas pie. That idea of a little, Christmas treat. He put in his thumb and pulled out a plum, that would be the deed, and said, "What a good boy am I." He feels no guilt about this. Not at all. Okay. Old Mother Hubbard. You know what? We have like 1 minute left, so let's save Old Mother Hubbard for next time. If you want to grade your book and see how you did on that quiz, it's actually the title of each one of these poems. Will give you a clue because they're all on that quiz. That's how I came up with that. I hope you had a really good day. Now, if you're from a non-English speaking country, your family is from a non-English speaking country, ask them if they had any nursery rhymes that they used to use to teach how to count days of the week. Or even silly rhymes that they would use to teach the language. Do me a favor and just translate them for me and write them in your book so I could see them, because I would love to get in on that and find out. Okay. And then on Thursday, we will finish up the book. We should be completely, maybe not. We got quite a lot to go. Hopefully Thursday we'll finish up the book. And then on Thursday, too, we'll talk about nonfiction literature, just a quick introduction. And then starting on Thursday, I can have The Hiding Place available for you at the school or at the school office. If you would like to read it on your own, you don't have to turn in any homework for that. You can tear out the reading guide if you want to use it, but you don't have to, and it's not required. It's just there in case you want to do it. But I will talk to you guys some more tomorrow. Nope, not tomorrow. Thursday. I'll talk to you Thursday, and we will get finished with this week for sure, either Thursday or Friday. Have a really good night.